No, it's
killing
not
the animal
killing
that
us.
wants to
No,
live.
it's not killing us. It's sustaining us. This is another one of those overpercent. Is the shark immoral for eating a fish?
No.
Why not?
Would you do me? I'd do me. I'd do me so hard.
So a couple weeks ago, I called into the Atheist Experience live show and challenged Matt Dillahunty's beliefs on animal ethics, and it was absolute cancer. Matt continually contradicted himself, his arguments were very vague and misleading, and he tried to accuse me of things I wasn't doing, and he just had terrible overall debate etiquette. This debate was also very brief, it only lasted for about 15 minutes, and I feel the conversation wasn't long enough for me to fully flesh out my arguments. So today I just wanted to do a recap on the short debate I had with Matt and add in some commentary and point out the contradictions and problems with Matt's arguments. So, I'd just like to ask you...
Sure.
Yeah, so I was actually going back and watching a few of the previous debates you've had. It's my understanding that you believe that morality is objective, at least to some extent, and you share a lot of the same views on morality as Sam Harris?
Yes.
Okay,
As a matter of fact, I just said that a few minutes ago.
Right. So Sam Harris says moral values are truths about the well-being of sentient beings. And...
No.
No?
Well, I won't say no. The particular phrase that he used in Moral Landscape was thinking creatures, not sentient.
This was the first mistake Matt made. I don't think he was lying. I'm pretty sure this is an honest mistake. But Sam Harris has stated that moral values are truths about conscious creatures, and consciousness is the exact same thing as sentience.
But values are a certain kind of fact. Okay, they are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures.
So I asked Matt this question because he does believe morality is objective, at least to some extent, and if he holds the same beliefs as Sam Harris that moral values are truths about conscious creatures, then obviously he'd have to be against the needless suffering and death of animals. And I do think it was an honest mistake that Matt made misquoting Sam Harris. But throughout this debate, it seemed as though Matt was suggesting that because animals don't have a high enough cognitive ability, it is therefore morally permissible to needlessly kill animals just to satisfy our taste pleasure. And the statement that Matt made up that moral values are truths about thinking creatures doesn't make any sense because the ability to think doesn't have anything to do with consciousness. Computers can think. Do you place moral values on computers? No. And of course, cows, chickens, and pigs, all of these animals we eat, are thinking creatures. They do have problem-solving abilities. So again, this isn't a justification to needlessly kill animals when you have plenty of vegan food options available. So I remember in, it was during, like it's an old video from August, but in that Atheist Experience live show, you said that your views on animal morality are speciesist. So with that,
Yes.
Did you mean that it is okay to kill animals and, let's say in the context, like, needlessly when you don't need to? So if you're at a grocery store, if you have access to a grocery store and you can either choose to eat a fully vegan diet or if you choose to eat an omnivorous diet, it's okay to needlessly kill an animal for food just because it's a different species than you? Is that what you meant by speciesist?
Yeah, so this is the thing what I mean about people arguing dishonestly, because when you say, is it okay to needlessly kill an animal, you are injecting all sorts of context into this.
So at the beginning of every debate, I always ask questions to get a good understanding of my opponent's arguments and opinions, and I was simply trying to ask Matt what he actually meant when he said his beliefs on animal ethics are speciesist. I interpreted this in a way that he was suggesting it is okay to needlessly kill and eat animals just because they are of a different species than us. I only wanted clarification on his position, and then he accuses me of arguing dishonestly and injecting context. How is asking a question and providing context so that you can better answer my question arguing dishonestly and injecting context? I didn't even make an argument. I was simply asking you a question. And the funny thing is, Matt accused me of poisoning the well after I made my first response video to him. Well, the only one poisoning the well here is you, because you're the one accusing me of dishonesty when I haven't even made an argument and I'm just asking you a question. This is what I mean by terrible debate etiquette, and there's just no excuse for Matt to act this way because he has so much debate experience, and I wasn't even being rude.
My position is really simple. I am not convinced that eating meat is immoral.
Okay, well, there needs to be a context. I mean, if you needed to eat meat to survive, like if you were an indigenous person and you lived in a tribe, I'd say it is morally acceptable to eat meat because you need to survive, but you're obviously not in that position. You have access to a grocery store. You don't need to kill animals to live and be healthy. So I put it in that context, because that's where that's where the
I don't accept the idea that need is the criteria. When I say I'm speciesist, really? I don't see anything wrong with that.
Okay, so Matt's answer was pretty unclear, and I think there are two ways of interpreting his response. On the one hand, it seemed as though he clarified his position. He believes it is morally permissible to kill and eat animals even when there is a lack of need to do so, because animals are a different species than us. So, in other words, he believes it is morally acceptable to needlessly kill animals because they're not human. Well, that's exactly what I was asking him in the first place. I asked the question, do you believe it is okay to needlessly kill and eat animals because they're just a different species than us? And then he accused me of arguing dishonestly and injecting context, but then he just answered affirmatively to my question. So I don't know what was going through his head and why he had to be hostile and accuse me of shit when he basically just answered yes to my question. And if this is his position, that it is morally acceptable to needlessly kill and eat animals because of an arbitrary distinction like species, then this is similar to racism, since racism also relies on an arbitrary distinction. Racism and speciesism don't take into account trait similarities that would logically grant rights to different races or different species. For example, if I were to say black people should be enslaved because they're not white, that isn't a logically consistent moral position, as black people have the same traits as white people that would grant them a right to freedom, such as sentience, intelligence, and self-determination. Similarly, if I were to claim it is morally acceptable to needlessly kill animals because they aren't human, that is not a logically consistent moral position because animals have the same traits that grant humans a right to life, including sentience, intelligence, and a will to live. Speciesism is just an illogical, arbitrary distinction similar to racism. And Matt has said in the past that he's fine with drawing arbitrary lines from a moral standpoint, so he has admitted to having logically inconsistent moral views, but keep in mind, this clip is from 9 years ago, so he might think differently now.
I have obviously slightly different views because you're right. I'm not a vegan. I'm an omnivore, and I am biased toward my species, and I draw an arbitrary line there, and I draw other arbitrary lines. First of all, I'm not in favor of animal cruelty, and people will say, well, if you're not for animal cruelty, then you should be a vegan because it's cruel to kill an animal. Well, yes, but I think that there's a humane, responsible way to do it.
Another way of interpreting Matt's response to my question is that when he says I'm speciesist and I don't see anything wrong with that,
I don't accept the idea that need is the criteria. When I say I'm speciesist, really? I don't see anything wrong with that.
He might mean that he doesn't see anything wrong with speciesism itself as an abstract concept, not that he doesn't see anything wrong with needlessly killing and eating animals. And this also doesn't make any sense because he's just not answering my question. I asked him, what do you mean when you say you're speciesist? It doesn't make sense that he'd reply back by saying, I have no problem with speciesism. So either Matt believes that it is morally acceptable to needlessly kill and eat animals because he's just making an arbitrary distinction at species, and I already explained why that's wrong. It's the same kind of logic behind racism, or he's just flat out not answering my question and he's talking about irrelevant feelings that he has. Matt has so much experience with philosophy and live debates, I don't see any excuse for his behavior. At best, he's being extremely vague and unclear, and at worst, he's just not answering my questions for whatever reason. And when I ask him questions so that I can get a better understanding of his position and his arguments, he just starts accusing me of dishonesty and injecting context. And this sets the tone for the rest of the debate.
Okay?
Okay.
What we're talking about is what rights we're going to extend. And rights are the product of thinking beings, and they are they don't exist independent. It's not like rights are out there, you know, as some sort of naturalistic product. We grant rights, and we make decisions about who we're going to grant rights to and who we're not.
Again, Matt continues to be vague, and he's not answering any of my questions. I asked him what he means when he says he's a speciesist. He didn't really give me a straight answer, and now he's talking about how rights are the product of thinking beings. Well, animals are thinking, sentient beings. It only makes sense that we grant some rights to animals due to them possessing similar traits that grant humans rights. And I'm trying to ascertain why Matt thinks the right to life should only be reserved to humans. Animals should be allowed to be needlessly killed for no reason. But when I ask him questions so that I can understand his position, he just accuses me of dishonesty.
So, when I'm talking with people who are arguing for ethical veganism, what they tend to get wrong is I have plenty of objections to the way meat is arrived at in a number of different scenarios. I have objections to certain types of factory farming scenarios and everything else, but I don't think that eating meat is in and of itself immoral.
Okay, well, I don't either. Like, if you find a dead animal on the side of the road and eat it, there's nothing immoral about that. Like, same with finding a dead human on the side of the road and eating it. That might be really weird, but it's not like you're
No, there is something immoral about that.
What?
There is something immoral about that.
What? Like, I can agree that it's disgusting, and somebody who does that is probably has problems, but I mean, you're not, the thing is, you're not causing harm to another person or being.
See, this is the problem. This is the problem with you and a number of others. You have this view of morality that it is essentially about a simplistic notion of causing harm.
Well, no.
And morality is, yes, that's what you just went to. You're arguing that it's okay to eat a human on the side of the road because you're not causing harm. Well, fundamentally, you are wrong in the sense that that is not the only criteria to consider, and you are wrong about whether or not it causes harm.
Okay.
We are in a social construct. We are in a social construct, in a contract with other human beings.
Right, I understand.
It is wrong for me to eat. It is wrong for me to eat another human being, not because of any direct effect on them after they're dead, but because there are people who care about that human being, and because it affects the quality of their life leading up to that.
This is just more dishonesty from Matt. You ignore my questions, and you add in context when it suits you, and remove it when it doesn't, just so that you don't have to acknowledge logical inconsistencies in your moral outlook. There is nothing inherently, intrinsically wrong with cannibalism, but context does matter, just as there's nothing inherently wrong with eating meat, but context does matter. And Matt injects his own context that, well, cannibalism is wrong because, it would negatively affect the rest of society, but when I talk about how it's wrong to needlessly cause the suffering and death of animals when you have other food choices available, you just start talking about how eating meat as an abstract concept is not inherently immoral. Matt has still not given an explanation for why he believes it's morally permissible to needlessly kill and eat animals when there are other food options available, and he's just talking about eating meat as an abstract concept just so that he can avoid answering some difficult questions and derail the entire conversation.
There's a reason we respect the wishes of people with regard to what we're going to do with their bodies after they're dead.
Okay.
It's not because Don tells me he wants me to treat his body in a certain way after he's dead. He doesn't want me to farm out his organs. He doesn't want me to eat him. He wants me to place him in a box and bury him in the ground and put a little A there. I respect Don's wishes, not because when he's dead it will affect him. I respect his wishes because the entirety of his life, he will live his life either with a good, sound conviction that his wishes will be respected, which makes the quality of his life better, or he will live with an anxiety that his wishes won't be respected,
okay, well,
which
at the same
diminishes
time,
the quality of his life.
Okay, well, first of all, there you have a bit of a contradiction. You're going back to well-being. And secondly, it sounds like you're...
That is what I say the foundation of morality is. Where's their
Right,
contradiction?
okay. And secondly, you seem to be claiming that the basis for morality is social contract?
No, I've said repeatedly, just literally 10 seconds ago, that my foundation for what I view as morality is well-being.
So there's several contradictions here. First, he claims that the foundation of morality is well-being. Well, animals can experience well-being. They are conscious creatures, so it makes no sense that he'd ignore the well-being of animals and needlessly kill them just for taste pleasure, which is an action that goes completely against their well-being. Secondly, it seems as though without realizing it, he's also making an appeal to social contract. He's saying that because eating a dead body would break some kind of social contract you have with other humans, that would cause other people distress and reduce their well-being, and therefore eating a dead body, cannibalism, would be immoral. However, if you come across a dead animal that's not breaking any kind of social contract and not causing people any distress, and therefore it is morally permissible. Well, you can't appeal to social contract because social contracts can be in direct opposition of well-being. For example, American slavery caused a great deal of harm to black people, but the slave trade did not break a social contract between white people, and in fact there was a social contract in place between slaves and slave owners. So, was slavery morally permissible because it did not break any kind of social contract, or would you agree that slavery was immoral because it caused a great deal of unnecessary harm? I don't see how Matt could claim that needlessly killing and eating animals is morally justified because it doesn't break any kind of social contract between humans, even though it does cause unnecessary harm, but he wouldn't accept that line of reasoning in other human contexts, like in slavery. He would have to point out a significant, meaningful difference between humans and animals that would justify this difference in treatment, which he's refusing to do, and whenever I ask questions that point out this contradiction, he accuses me of dishonesty. It sounds like he's never given this topic much thought, and he's just coming up with weird arguments and excuses on the fly, and he doesn't realize he's just contradicting himself. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that Matt might not be talking about the needless killing of animals. He might, again, be arguing about how eating meat itself as an abstract concept is not inherently immoral, which would just be dishonest because he knows I'm speaking within the context of needless killing. So Matt would just be injecting his own context here so that he can avoid arguing about the actual issue I'm trying to discuss, which would be extremely hypocritical because, like, just a minute ago, he was talking about me injecting context, and that would just, again, be another example of his terrible debate etiquette. On top of that, you're just flat out ignoring the practical realities of animal agriculture. The nature of the industry itself causes a tremendous amount of needless suffering and death, and the dairy industry is a perfect example of this. In order for a mother cow to produce milk, she has to be pregnant, and once the mother cow gives birth, her baby is immediately ripped away from her, and baby cows are usually just placed into the veal industry if they're not just thrown out into the garbage. And this is extremely stressful for both the mother and baby cow because cows have very strong maternal instincts. How do you justify causing this unnecessary suffering and death when you claim your moral values are based upon well-being? What is the justification for you to be tormenting these poor innocent fucking animals just so that you can consume, like, milk and cheese that you don't need? There are vegan options available to you. And this is a reality across the meat industry as a whole. These animals we kill are very social, and it gives them a great deal of stress when we kill members of their social groups. We also selectively breed these animals to be as profitable to the industry as possible, but this gives them severe health problems. Egg-laying hens, for instance, have been bred to lay eggs every single day. This isn't natural for them, and so they develop serious reproductive problems that can cause extreme suffering and eventual death. Eggs can become lodged in their stomach, which is extremely painful and eventually kills them. Egg production drains them of calcium, and so they develop osteoporosis, and they don't form eggs properly, which again leads to blockages and kills them. Even if we follow the best possible humane standards and these egg-laying hens are free-range, grass-fed, la-di-da, they would still have to endure these painful, life-threatening reproductive issues just because we selectively bred them to be as profitable to the industry as possible. Just by the nature of selectively breeding animals, you increase the likelihood of them developing genetic diseases. This happens with every single animal we domesticate, from dogs and cats to cows, chickens, and pigs. And it's especially true of these farm animals because we want them to be as big and fat as possible, but this gives them heart problems, digestive problems, joint problems. They have a higher risk of developing certain cancers. Sometimes these animals grow so insanely huge so quickly they can't even walk. If your moral principles are based on well-being, then how do you justify needlessly tormenting these animals and literally breeding in disease when all of this is completely unnecessary? You can just eat some fucking tofu instead! Even the conditions these animals live in are horrible. They live in cramped, windowless sheds, which only increases the risk of them getting an infectious disease. I know Matt likes to pay lip service to the idea of animal welfare, but you can't claim that you're against these industry practices while you're still buying meat, dairy, and eggs. If you were honest about your moral values, then you'd recognize that veganism is a moral imperative, but instead you'd just prefer to play these mental gymnastics and put your head in the sand and remain willfully ignorant about the unnecessary suffering and death you're causing. Even if Matt has a bias to his own species and cares more about human well-being than animal well-being, well, animal agriculture is reducing our well-being. Our most common chronic diseases are caused by animal products, and vegans have the lowest risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the largest organization of nutrition professionals on the planet, has even released a published peer-reviewed statement claiming that vegan diets are suitable for all ages from pregnancy to adulthood and have disease-preventing benefits. So how do you justify needlessly causing the suffering and death of these animals along with increasing the rates of disease and death among our own human species if your moral values are based on well-being? Animal agriculture is also one of the leading contributing factors to global warming. According to the United Nations, animal agriculture produces more greenhouse gas emissions than all the world's transportation systems combined. Does making the planet less habitable for us through climate change improve our well-being, Matt? Animal agriculture is also responsible for our infectious diseases, which kills millions of people each year. Everything from influenza, polio, smallpox, HIV, and the Ebola virus has been caused by our close proximity to animals through domestication, agriculture, and trade. And worse yet, all of these antibiotics we're using in the animal agriculture industry is making bacterial infections more common and harder to treat.
Yet throughout most of human evolution, there were no epidemic diseases. No one ever got the measles because measles didn't exist. No one got smallpox, no one got the flu, not even the common cold, until about here, 10,000 years ago. Medical anthropologists have identified 3 major periods of disease since the beginning of human evolution, and the first started just 10,000 years ago with the domestication of animals. When we brought animals into the barnyard, they brought their diseases with them. When we domesticated cows and sheep, for example, we also domesticated their rinderpest virus, which turned into human measles, now thought of as a relatively benign disease. Over the last 150 years, measles has killed 200 million people. And in a sense, all those deaths can ultimately be traced back just a few hundred generations to the taming of the first cattle. Smallpox likely came from camel pox. We domesticated pigs and got whooping cough. We domesticated chickens, and we got typhoid fever and Typhoid Mary. and domesticated ducks and got influenza. Before the domestication of ducks, likely no one ever got the flu. Leprosy likely came from water buffalo, and the common cold from horses. How often did wild horses have the opportunity to sneeze into humanity's collective face until they were broken and bridled?
Again, how do you justify needlessly spreading deadly infectious diseases if your moral values are based on well-being? If you are being logically consistent and honest about your moral beliefs, you would promote veganism as a means of reducing the suffering and death of both humans and animals. And what about how this affects humans on an emotional level? Slaughterhouse workers often get PTSD and serious emotional distress from killing these innocent animals. This is an article from The Observer where a slaughterhouse worker talked about how he was mentally fucked up from killing pigs that acted like family pets. Like, you talked about how you care about the emotional well-being of humans, then how do you justify supporting this kind of industry? And aren't you also harming the emotional well-being of vegans by killing these animals, Matt? You're harming us emotionally, so is that a good enough reason for you to stop eating meat? So, your argument is just incredibly weak. It's self-contradictory and makes no sense at any level of analysis. If you're claiming that the basis of your moral principles is well-being, then clearly animal agriculture, at least for us in modern Western civilization, is not a net good for the human species, nor is it beneficial for these animals we are needlessly killing. So, based on your own set of moral principles, you do have an obligation to not needlessly cause the suffering and death of animals with your food choices. And this will conclude part 1. There's still a lot of this video that I want to go over, but I decided to split this up into multiple parts because I don't think most of you want to watch a 2-hour-long video. So stay tuned for part 2, which should be coming out in a few days. And if you like these sort of videos, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. I have some funding perks you may find interesting. Also, if you're looking for clothing, check out the Vegan Gain store. And as always, keep making those vegan and don't needlessly kill animals gains.
Because that only exists between thinking creatures.
Okay, well, right, so it sounds...
I don't have a moral obligation to a rock, do I?
Values are a certain kind of fact. Okay, they are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. Why is it that we don't have ethical obligations toward rocks?